it's a very lonely place when you don't have anybody to turn to but your predator.
It's big business.
When we start talking about it happening in Georgia, people almost instantly say no.
It happens in Atlanta every day.
There are people that say, wow, this is happening in Georgia?
It's child sex trafficking. Tonight, Public Broadcasting Atlanta presents a special report. Where is this happening?
It may be lawyers, doctors, priests. It's people that you don't think of.
And what can we do about it?
Everybody has an opportunity to impact this issue.
Good evening, I'm Dennis O'Hare. Tonight, you watched Whitestone Motion Pictures' short film, The Candy Shop. It's a fairy tale that presents an allegory for child exploitation. Now, director Brandon McCormick says he created the film to raise awareness and to move people to action. But just how big is the child sex trafficking problem here in Atlanta? Tonight, Public Broadcasting Atlanta is using all its resources, WABE News, PBA 30, and PublicSquareAtlanta.org to find answers. Tonight, we'll talk to local leaders about what's really happening in our community and what you can do about it. First tonight, WABE's Rose Scott sits down with a survivor.
My mother, she was schizophrenic. She wasn't able to raise me. I don't know my father. I basically raised myself. I was able to do anything that I wanted.
Kesha's story starts like many other girls growing up in Atlanta that end up on the streets. Raised in a troubled home, she was taken into custody and placed into foster care. But things didn't get any better, and she was abused.
I think a lot of the foster parents got me just to get a check each month. It wasn't nothing that they did out of love.
So Kesha ran away. She stayed in abandoned apartments and struggled to survive.
As a child, I was forced to make decisions, like clothing myself, how I was going to feed myself. It was very scary.
Can you tell me about the first time you were introduced to a pimp?
It was a whole different type of world, one that I never knew existed. I was introduced to my first pimp by a childhood friend who had went to my church.
Kesha was introduced to Charles Pipkins, an Atlanta pimp who was known on the street as Sir Charles. She was impressed by his wealth.
He drove a very nice, I think he had a Mercedes-Benz at the time, and I had nothing. So I guess he was glamorized to me.
Kesha would be prostituted by Sir Charles in southeast Atlanta along Metropolitan Avenue. But she didn't stay there long.
I worked like 2 days, and the police actually pulled me over, and told me that I didn't belong on Metropolitan, that I should go to Peachtree Street. And I was like, what's on Peachtree? He's like, you look too nice to be on Metropolitan. You need to go down to Peachtree Street. So that's when I was introduced to 14th and Crescent on Peachtree Street.
It's in the heart of Atlanta.
Mm-hmm, in the heart of Atlanta.
Kesha's story is not unique. Cheryl DeLuca Johnson is the executive director of Street Grace, a nonprofit organization that works to raise awareness about child trafficking in Atlanta. Cheryl, a licensed counselor, first discovered the depth of the problem while working with a group for eating disorders.
There was a 24-year-old young woman who was telling her story, and part of her story changed dramatically when at the age of 12 she was raped. That rape turned her to drugs and alcohol, which led her into being prostituted as a child. And here I was sitting with her 12 years later, while she's still trying to get her life back together. And before the group was over, more than half the women had a similar story. And I realized that I had loved these women for over a decade in working with them, and that there was a child out there creating their story today.
A story like Kesha's.
I would go to work from 10 at night and come back sometimes like 7 in the mornings. And sometimes all the money didn't go. Sometimes I kept money secretly, but it was a known rule that all the money was supposed to go to him. On my quota each night was $1,000.
What were the consequences if you didn't bring in 1,000?
Some girls, they were beat. I didn't have that problem because I worked on Peachtree and the prices were higher. Like on Stewart Avenue, the prices were $40 for each act versus Peachtree, it was $100 plus.
Kathy McCullough is the program director of A Future Not a Past. It's a project of the Juvenile Justice Fund.
Our primary mission is to stop the demand because it's really the demand that fuels this business.
A 2009 study by the Shapiro Group was the first to determine just how overwhelming that demand is in Georgia, shocking even the people working on the front lines.
When the principal researcher called and said that we had 7,200 men a month either unknowingly or knowingly buying sex from an adolescent girl, it took my breath away.
The study found that 7,200 transactions were made every month in Georgia for a sex act with an adolescent female.
Approximately 129 children will be raped for profit 10 to 15 times on a Thursday, Friday, or Saturday night in Atlanta. I used to be a math major, and I sat down and I figured that out. And that meant that every 54 seconds, a child was being raped for profit in Atlanta.
Another surprise was that 42% of the men who were buying sex with young females were from North Metro outside the perimeter. 23% of the men were from south of the perimeter, 26% from the urban core, and 9% from the airport.
This was not an inner city problem. The drivers of this business were somewhere else. And what that also said to me was, okay, that's really going to hold our feet to the fire. It may be lawyers, doctors, priests, Congress people, and it could be anybody. It could be my father, it could be my husband, it could be my brothers, it could be my uncles. It's people that you don't think of.
This is a reenactment of an actual phone call from the demand study. The caller is an Atlanta resident responding to a fake ad for an escort service.
What kind of girl were you looking for? Like, do you like white girls? Asian, black, Puerto Rican?
White girls, 18 years old.
You said what, 18?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. We do have some girls that are 18.
You do? What's the youngest you got?
We actually have one that's 16.
You do?
Yeah.
That's good. What's the youngest girl you got?
The youngest, I told you, this youngest is 16. And then you said you prefer a white girl, and the youngest we have there is 17.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, do you have two?
No, just one, but we do have one that's 18. But the 16, 17-year-olds, those are the only ones, and then from there we have more, 18-year-olds, 19, 20, 21.
No, 15?
15?
Yeah.
No, we don't have any 15.
Hundreds of calls just like this are made every day in Metro Atlanta. Kathy believes there's only one way to stop them.
It's a business, and unfortunately our children are the assets for these people that want to exploit them. And then there's a demand side. And if you want to bring down a business, you either have to reduce the supply or you got to reduce the demand.
The demand for girls like Kesha can also be life-threatening.
On my bad days, I wanted to get out. The bad days were the days that I was raped, when guys would give me money and perform an act with me and take the money back and kick me out the car. The days that I would almost get kidnapped, when I would tell them to go in one direction, they would hop on the highway and try to take me somewhere else, God knows where. Bad days were the days where I felt lonely. Yeah, it was times I wanted to get out, but I didn't have nowhere to go.
Coming up, find out how Kesha turned her life around. But next, Rose sits down with people who are working to give survivors of child sex trafficking a place to heal.
Wellspring Living is a recovery center that offers a program specifically for survivors of child sex trafficking in Georgia. Through a combination of therapy and education, the program can treat up to 14 girls at a time. I went to Wellspring to talk to clinical directors Tracy Bussey and Lisa Bird about how they help survivors find hope.
How do you sort of maintain this emotional, balance and not get so emotionally wrapped up? Because I know you have to hear a lot of horror stories.
93% of girls that are trafficked have been sexually abused. And so, of course, most of our girls come in with some story of being abused. We've had 2 girls who were sexually trafficked at the age of 1. And so, the trafficking happens along all lines. Now, the average is more between 11 and 13.
But really, they're no different from you or I. They're just broken people who've had bad experiences, who just need people like us and our volunteers and people like you to tell the story so that they can get the help that they need and have the resources that they need.
Can you talk about the mindset? I know you touched on it a little bit, but why they don't leave? Why don't they seek help? Or is it that they don't know where to go?
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of the girls are coerced into what they do. A good example is the 13-year-old girl we had. For a year before she was in our program, her pimp started just kind of wooing her. He became her boyfriend. He took her places. He did things for her. And after dating her for a year, he started to traffic her.
What kind of environment are many of these girls coming out of?
Some of the girls do come from what you would think of as like a typical inner city home, low income, maybe a single parent home, maybe they're being raised by a grandparent. But a lot of these kids are coming from the suburbs and other cities all around Georgia.
Childhood sexual abuse is very, very prevalent. Physical abuse and neglect. And I think a pretty consistent factor is absent fathers that, a lot of the young girls, like Tracy was saying, cling to their pimps or to these unhealthy relationships because they're looking for dad, looking for love that they aren't getting from their father.
How do you, for lack of better words, how do you convince them or get them to understand that what they've been through, 1, was not their fault, or 2, that that's not a dependency they need, particularly if they're coming out of an environment where they haven't felt love or experienced a family structure?
Mm-hmm. It might sound simplistic, but I think the first thing you do is love them. You show them that you really love them, you really care about them. I think that's always the turning point for these girls, when they're really like, wow, Miss Tracy really cares about me, or Miss Amanda really cares, or whoever, oh, you really went out of your way for me that day. Once they realize somebody out there cares about them, they get that connection, and then we look back at their past trauma and we see where love was missing for them. And they can identify new ways to get what they need and what was meant for them.
Tracy, Lisa, thank you so much.
I also sat down with Wellspring founder Mary Frances Boley to talk about the challenges they face.
So from the time when these girls are either picked up by the police or referred through the courts, are they then able to come to Wellspring? Is that how it works?
Yes, basically, there usually is a period of time when they're going through the process of getting their paperwork in alignment and being able to be placed with us.
Where are they in that process? Where are they being housed then?
They're in jail, or sometimes they're still being exploited. And we just have to hope that they stay safe until they're able to get in placement with us.
How difficult is that for you to know that while you have this great facility, there's this time period where you don't know what's happening to some of these girls?
It's really hard. When I think the most difficult day I had was when Tracy called me one day and said, I have 3 girls that need a place and I only have 1 bed. How do I choose? What do you do? Because you know that their lives are in danger. And so you are in this desperate place of desiring so much to serve, but if you don't have the resources to serve more, your hands are tied.
You are not a state funded agency. You're not a state agency.
No, we're privately funded, and we also have a couple of upscale resale stores that help us with our operating expenses, but we need the help of the general public so that we could offer these services.
That's my next question. Someone watching, how can they get involved? And maybe say, well, I don't have many financial resources, or, what can I do?
Actually coming and teaching a class, or if you're creative and you can make something that can be sold in the store. I mean, that helps. Anything that you have as an interest, if you are somebody that just wants to talk, you tell the story, that helps the girls. You want to write your legislator and tell them you want them to do something to help streamline the process so girls can be served quicker. Anybody that brings their voice to this, brings their talents to this, that is something that is very needed. And so volunteers have just a plethora of ways to be involved.
If you could look into a crystal ball and foresee the future of Wellspring, what would be for you just in terms of either facilities or resources? I mean, what's the next big, initiative you think is important for Wellspring in terms of expansion?
We are already in the process of taking our best practices and training other cities in how to open facilities like our facility, because right now we're one of the largest facilities that capacity-wise in the United States that is specific for victims of commercial sexual exploitation.
With just 14 beds? Mm-hmm. You're the largest in the nation?
We're one of the largest in the nation, yes. But because most facilities are not prepared for the desperate and traumatic needs that the girls that we are able to serve have.
All right. Mary Frances Bowley, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Rose.
All right.
Coming up, we'll find out what advocates say you can do to help stop child sex trafficking in Georgia. But next, a proposed child prostitution law created controversy at the state capitol in 2010. We'll hear from both sides.
I had a minister come and say to me, "Do you know what's happening 2 blocks from this Capitol?" And I said, "No, I don't." And he said, "Little girls are getting off at the Greyhound bus station and being picked up by pimps." And my mouth was wide open.
In the last decade, state lawmakers like Buford Republican Senator Renee Unterman learned how many children like Kesha are exploited in Georgia. By 2008, Unterman was co-chair of a joint House-Senate study commission. Among its members, 2 men who now occupy even more powerful positions: Democratic State Senator Kasim Reed, now mayor of Atlanta, and Blue Ridge Republican Representative David Ralston, now Speaker of the State House and one of the most powerful people in Georgia's government.
That was a very a painfully eye-opening experience. I think that's a shame upon our state. I think it's imperative that we do what we can to eradicate that. That's one distinction that we can live without, I think.
The Commission's recommendations included clearer language in an existing law that requires teachers, therapists, and others to report suspected child exploitation, so they would know they must report anyone who abuses a child, not just a parent or caretaker. More treatment facilities for victims, and more tools and funding for police and prosecutors to go after pimps and johns. But while legislators did clarify the reporting law and added some funding for treatment, money to prosecute those who prey on children remains scarce in both state and local budgets.
I wish we had money for all the problems in the state. We have law enforcement out there working this issue now. We have the private sector groups that are working. And I think we need to encourage those efforts as much as we possibly can.
In an effort to change how law enforcement treats young sex workers, Senator Unterman wrote a 2010 bill which said police and prosecutors could only file criminal prostitution charges against those 16 and over. Sex workers younger than 16 would get juvenile detention and treatment.
I believe a child is a victim. I don't believe they're a criminal. I don't believe when you're 12 or 13 years old you really know what sex is, and you really know that you're doing a crime.
But Unterman's bill never became law. Some religious groups, like the Georgia Baptist Convention, successfully opposed it, saying it could unintentionally encourage more teen prostitution. Ray Newman is the GBC's specialist in ethics and public policy.
All of a sudden, this opens it up for those elusive Johns and pimps that are out there that we can't seem to find, and to say, oh, if it's not illegal for me to have 14-year-olds on the street, then I'll use 14-year-olds rather than 17 or 18-year-olds.
One of the things that you mentioned is how difficult it is to sometimes get the name of a pimp from the young sex worker.
Yes.
If the young sex worker is accused of a crime, wouldn't that make it even more difficult to get that information from her or him, as the case?
Well, there would be some who would want to say that, but you always have that plea bargaining chip at that point as you're dealing with them, I think, that you could say to them, well, this is an issue that we can provide help for you through the helping agencies that are out there. If you can just help us be able to bring this person that's preyed upon you to justice, and that's what we would want.
You know, my idea is if you put a young girl that's 15 years old, you handcuff them, you throw them in the back of a patrol car, you put them in the YDC, the detention facility, and within 3 days they're back out. They go back out on the street.
While Senator Unterman is unsure whether she'll try again in the new legislature, other advocates are about to introduce a much more wide-ranging bill on human trafficking at any age. Among other things, it would ban the detention of victims in jails, require the state to provide a system of services to victims, and force traffickers, like pimps, to pay restitution to those they've exploited. If this bill starts moving, opposition to some parts of it will again be fierce. But Ray Newman says the Georgia Baptist Convention and others aren't just saying no to provisions they don't like. He said they've formed coalitions to take on teen sex trafficking in areas where all sides agree.
Yes, I have been involved with organizations that are trying to do something about the sex trafficking in Georgia, and I think they're making some inroads, although it's very slow.
What do you think someone who is just watching this and learning about how pervasive this problem is can do, other than just say, oh, how awful? What can somebody do to make a difference?
I think it's very vital that parents be aware that this issue of sex slavery and sex trafficking is, again, not something that's just reserved for one segment of our culture or society, but it's everywhere.
And the most important thing people can do to help me and to help the issue is to let legislators know that it's important to them, whether it's a mayor of a city, a council member, or a senator or a representative, so that they know that you can make a difference. And that one person sitting at home that wants to make a difference, you can make a difference. And it's just by getting involved.
It's a very lonely place when you don't have anybody to turn to but your predator.
You heard Kesha's story earlier. Trapped in a troubled childhood, she worked as a prostitute at a young age to make money to survive. In 2001, her pimp, Sir Charles, was arrested and sentenced to prison. Kesha, no longer with Sir Charles, had decided to start her own escort service.
I just showed them a better way to get away from a pimp. That's what I thought I was doing. But now that I look back, I see that I was enabling them.
In 2006, Kesha was arrested for drug trafficking, and she found herself behind bars. And that's when everything changed.
I spent 3 years in prison, and at that time I found myself and who I was. And I reassociated myself with that 13-year-old girl that I had left behind so long ago.
Kesha decided it was time to rise above her painful history.
I was responsible for my own actions, regardless of how hard my life had been. And at that point, I started loving myself, and I learned the definition of true love and what love is. And love doesn't hurt. Love doesn't send me out to prostitute myself. And once I grasped that, I don't know, I just became alive.
Tonight, we've taken an in-depth look at the child sex trafficking problem in Atlanta. But what are advocates doing about it, and what can you do? Earlier, we showed you that 47% of the callers in the Shapiro Group study ignored warnings that they might be purchasing an escort under 18 years old. But that also means that over half the men stopped.
Part of it is raising awareness in a way that may reduce or change the thinking of Johns, of those men who purchase children. And if we can do that, then there's a chance we can diminish the number that will buy a child.
The pimps are the ones that tend to be the ones that are getting prosecuted, and for good reason. But we need to start making the cases with the buyers.
One of the biggest challenges advocates face is the Internet.
The Internet has really changed this business the way it's changed every other business.
Originally, one of the most popular websites for adult services was Craigslist, an online forum of classified ads. In 2010, under mounting legal pressure, Craigslist removed its adult services section. However, other sites quickly picked up the business Craigslist left behind. One of those websites is the online classifieds website Backpage.com. The business is still booming, but advocacy groups like A Future Not a Past are not deterred.
We're going to be monitoring Backpage with volunteers to be looking at and identifying girls that look young on that and beginning to quantify that.
From prosecuting the people who create this problem to treating survivors, the sexual exploitation of children is a very complex issue with lots of unanswered questions.
It's much more complex when you start getting down in the weeds than it is when you're up at 100,000 feet thinking, okay, we just need more beds. Well, we do. But we also need to make sure that the whole rest of the system is being brought along, and the rest of the, by system I'm meaning the police, the schools, the hospitals, anybody that's going to be involved in this are being brought along at the same pace so that we can kind of build it like this. And then it's a matter of how long do you keep them in treatment versus putting them out back in the community, and what's the best practices. Those are all things that we're building the plane as we fly it.
But advocates all say things will not change until people take action. For instance, Street Grace facilitates volunteer opportunities for people looking to help.
We match the volunteers who sign up on our webpage to those opportunities so that there's meaningful action that can actually change the issue. One of the volunteer actions is certainly Lobby Day. I don't know where we got the idea that the elected officials were supposed to tell us how to lead our lives. It is actually our job and our responsibility to tell our elected officials what's important to us. The truth is that the most powerful number we can ever talk about is the number 1. That one person choosing to take one meaningful action, one day at a time, one day a month, 1 hour a week, can change this for decades in the lives of our children.
Child sex trafficking is taking place every day in our community, from the suburbs to the inner city. It's a problem that advocates will be fighting on the streets, in courtrooms, and at the Capitol for years to come.
And we encourage you to continue the discussion once this program is over. To watch this program again, visit our community engagement website, publicsquareatlanta.org. There you'll find articles, statistics, plus an online forum to discuss the issue with others.
That's all for our program tonight. Thank you for joining us for this Public Broadcasting Atlanta special report. I'm Rose Scott.
And I'm Dennis O'Hare. Good night.
Oh, blessed child, be not afraid. The will heal. Oh, blessed child, with thy sun eclipsed, does not the darkness reign, but vengeance falls on blackened souls. Thy light will shine.